You're listening to another episode of From the Dust with Sarah Decker, a place to explore spiritual experiences and topics. And no, we are never alone. I've been lucky enough to meet you in person, and I'm so glad to have you on today.
That's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. When you've told me only a little bit about your story, but I thought it was quite an interesting story, and what a testimony of Christ that you have now. And so I think it's interesting because sometimes we see people on what we view as like the top of the hill, like they're doing so well. We look at them and we may have this like goal to be like them someday, but we don't realize that it really took a lot of work for them to get there, and we don't see the rest of the story. We kind of sometimes feel like there's no way that could be us, when we don't understand that, the work that it really took sometimes for people to be where they are. So and I think it's a beautiful thing, and it's encouraging. It's encouraging, and I think can bring a lot of people hope. So
Well, that's awesome. Isn't it just like the tip of the iceberg? Whenever we see someone, we don't really recognize what's under the surface.
for sure.
We see what we see. And
Yeah.
so thank you for that kindness. And I feel the same about you and about others that I've met. I find when we meet people who not just have a testimony of, who the Savior is, but when we meet people who actually know him, there's always so much, like a beautiful story behind beautiful testimonies, right? And it's not always the prettiest story, but beautiful nonetheless.
That's one thing that, I can't cry this early in my video, Nick. Come on. That's one thing that the Lord told me when I was first being told to share my story. Your video disappeared. Just a second. See if you come back here.
There we go.
There you are. That was one. I was just saying that was one thing that the Lord told me early on, is that my story could help people, and that the people that it was meant to help would see it for the beautiful story it was. Like sometimes we get afraid to share our story because we're afraid that we'll be judged. And yeah, there's going to be judgment because human nature, and people can be really judgmental and mean. But there's also the people who really see the beauty in the story, and they understand the journey and the struggle that got that person to where they are, and that walk with Christ, and respect that, and have love and compassion for that too. And it encourages the people that are on that path as well. And I know I felt really alone quite often as I was really walking I don't know what you want to call it, dark night of the soul, what it felt like, this terrible experience. I often referred to it as my hell on earth. And so it's an incredibly difficult walk, but oh so beautiful on the other side. And to be able to look back and see how God orchestrated the moments to help you get to that beautiful place on the other side, and that it was beautiful in the moment, as well as he answers those prayers, as he helps us to see those things within us that we really struggle with, that maybe we haven't given a voice. He helps us to kind of unpack and give light to some of the inner turmoil, and it is all beautiful. It just doesn't always feel very beautiful at the time, and it's a difficult thing.
No doubt. It's crappy sometimes, but like the crap that we experience, I look at it a lot like fertilizer, right? Like it's really crappy, but it's exactly what we need to grow, like to fuel our growth. We can grow without it, right? But not as quickly, and not as abundantly, like produce as abundantly as we can when we actually have that crap mixed into our experience. And so
Yeah.
you said a couple things just now that really
Just a second. Just a
resonate with
second. My toddler ran up here, and normally they're not able to come up here, so I got to figure
me.
out.
You're good.
I got to send him back downstairs. But
It's all good. The
I
other day
just
I was in
downstairs.
a class, and and my son Elijah, he ran up, and it was a Zoom call, and there was like 20 people on it, and I was sitting there, and Elijah was just running back and forth, and I'm just glad it wasn't like my class.
Okay. Yeah.
I went to Sacrament like every Sunday. If she didn't feel good, I was still there with the kids. It's just part of who I am. And so one day I'm there, and my oldest at the time was like 2, and she was eating like Ritz crackers or something super loud, maybe some Cheez-Its in a bag. Um, anyway, she was making all this noise, and I was like so like frustrated. I was like, oh, she's disrupting the spirit, right? And the Lord was like, because I'm sitting there like, shh, Ellie, be quiet. And the Lord was like, you know that you're being louder than her, right? Like, oh, okay. He was like, I love the children. Like let it be. It's music to my ears. Let them just be. And I was like, okay. I mean, that was a cool little chastisement that I really appreciate though, because it's helped me like have grace and hold space for the little ones always.
Totally. That reminds me of a different but similar chastisement. I mean, I bringing to my realization, I guess, definitely could be also coined as chastisement, but walking around my house as a mom, feeling like all I do is clean and my house looks like I never even bother, and going, oh my gosh, what do I do about this? And he's like,
Right.
the only way to get rid of the stuff is to get rid of the people.
Hmm.
And I was just like, oh, right, right. And he's like, and they should have stuff. Like they should have their stuff, like it's not like you shouldn't just take it all away from them, right? And so
Right.
that it's clean. And you don't want to get rid of the people, obviously. You love them. So
Right.
the stuff and then what he showed me, he said, I view all of the little things as drops of their love. Look at them as drops of love because they are a part of these people that you love and it means they're in your life. And so they're little
Right.
drops of love and joy. And if you can, and he showed me like the feeling of how you can look at that differently and experience that differently so that you're feeling that love.
Oh, there we go. I don't know why my camera's acting up. Well, I cast out all of these distractions. Like, I see. I mean, at first I was having trouble logging in, and the camera issue, and it's all
Well, I
good.
kind of laughed because I'm like, well, I wonder what kind of issues I'm going to have today because if it's going to be a good conversation, it's almost like it's guaranteed or something.
Right, right.
Sometimes it just happens.
I mean, that's an interesting perspective, and that's what I found to be true in my case too. Um, so I feel impressed to kind of introduce myself a little bit. I know your audience, or at least I perceive that I know, the type of audience that you have here on this podcast. And so I just want to share a few relevant things to kind of help connect us, I
Please
guess, if
do.
that's okay.
Please do. I do normally ask people to introduce themselves first, and I kind of detoured
Yeah, no
past
way.
there as we chatted.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. And so I'm Nick, obviously, and I have an LDS background. I was a member of the church for 30 years. And I like to tell people that I came to know the Savior, or I came to believe in the Savior when I was baptized, and I was baptized when I was 15, but it wasn't until I was 30 that I began to fall in love with Christ. And so that's when I think the real relationship started for me. Um, I don't want to go too much into my past, but I'll just highlight a few different things for perspective. I was married when I was 19. Me and my ex-wife, we were sealed. We received our endowment in the Nauvoo Temple when it first opened, and we were sealed there. And then about I don't know, within 6 months, she had lost her testimony. She left the church, and she essentially gave me an ultimatum. You can choose me or you could choose the church, but you can't have both. And so at that time, like I had already, and I just skipped over all my childhood trauma, but it's sufficient to say that there was a lot of that. We grew up poor. My mom was on drugs. She was a victim of sexual abuse from a young age. And so there's just a lot going on in my life as a kid that kind of gave me a poor mindset as a young adult because I just didn't have a lot of guidance. Um, so that carried over into that marriage, and so I didn't really have. I wouldn't say I had faith in Christ, even though I'd been to the temple. Like I would say that I believed in him, but my faith was very immature at that time. I don't think that I would be comfortable calling it faith just yet. But I had a strong belief in Christ. I recognized his blessings, and my faith began to develop. But at the same time, I was overcoming a lot of. Actually, at that time, I was just wallowing in a lot of trauma. And so my wife, she left the church, gave me that ultimatum, and I told the Lord, I was like, man, this is too hard. I've had it too tough. I can't do this. I can't do all these things and figure this out. It's just too heavy. So I took off my garments. I said, okay, well, I'm done. And I went to the Lord, and I still reverenced everything. It's not that I didn't believe. It's just that I even acknowledged I'm openly rebelling against you, Lord, because your way is too hard. It's too tough for me. And so that I chose her, and within a few months, I got kicked out of the army for a few things, and there we go. So I was discharged from the army for a few things because they said I treated the military like a fraternity, and that's not what it was. Um, I get in trouble. I come back to my soon to be ex-wife. She has another man in her life, and my world just kind of turned upside down, which led me down a path of heavy drugs and alcohol, um and I stayed there for about 10 years. And so that takes me to about the time I was about 29 or 30. And I finally got to a point in my life where I realized I'm heading nowhere, and um I really need help. And the help that I need, it can only come from Christ. So I found myself in jail. This was 2013. Found myself in jail, and I got in trouble for stealing something very petty. Um, and it was the first time when I found myself in jail that I'd been sober in 10 years. So there was a Bible in my cell, and I picked up the Bible and I started reading, and I started having these dreams, vivid dreams. And so I told my cellmate about those, and he was just powerful 80-year-old man that was just in there on he couldn't pay some traffic fines or something like that. So he was just in there because he was poor and couldn't pay. And he gave me his testimony of the Lord and of what he believed the Lord was communicating to me in my dreams, which resonated with me. So I get out of jail, and that's when I was finally at my wits end, and I was like, all right, Lord, I've tried this my way, and it's not working. So let me go ahead and try it your way, right? And I made a covenant with him. That was the first time I actually made a covenant with him, of my own free will and aware of what I was doing, right? So I was like, okay, Lord, I'm going to let go of the drugs, the selling drugs, the doing drugs, the associating with people who are on drugs, and I'm going to go find a job. and I'm going to be diligent. I'm going to show you that I'm serious about turning my life around. And a few miracles happened. Um, within the next couple of months, a few miracles happened, and I'm seeing the Lord's hand in my life. Now, I still, struggled with a lot of things. I was letting go of the drugs, but I relapsed a few times. But I kept getting back up. I kept getting back up, and the Lord, He kept comforting me with His Spirit, and so I felt like I was being recharged, and then I found myself wanting to go back to church, and so I go back to church, and I have these holy jeans and like a skull T-shirt on, and I'm like, but I just wanted to be there. So I sit down, and the lady that's speaking at sacrament, she stands up and she says, the bishop asked me to talk about journals today. And I don't know why, because I don't keep a journal. So I'm thinking that there's someone out there who needs to keep a journal. And right when she said that, it's like the Lord was right here. He was like, that's you, Nick. And it was so crazy because I'd never heard him before, like so clearly. And so I followed that impression. I went to the store, I got a journal after sacrament, and that leads us to that's in January of 2014 now. Um, I start writing in this journal in January, and I write for about 10 days. And it's like the spirit came over me, and I really didn't write about all the bad things that had happened to me. It was like I was reminding myself of everything that I believe. And so I felt like I was telling myself a version of my story that I wanted to remember, and that maybe one day if I had kids, I could, I could share, hey, this is where my journey began coming back to the Lord. Well, 10 days after I began writing in my journal, my younger brother was murdered. And so that was an intense fire for me. Um, I like to say, oh, I used to say that it was the hardest thing that ever happened to me, but now I honor it, and I'm grateful for it because it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was through that experience that the Lord began to communicate with me because my heart was cracked open. I was broken. I was seeking, and I uh I realized there were go strange. So I was seeking the Lord, and I realized that I had some work to do in the temple. And in order to go back to the temple, I had to have some hard conversations. And I had to get a lot of things right. And not only did I want to go to the temple for my brother, I wanted to serve. I wanted to serve the Lord. He came to me that day that I found out my brother was murdered. And he said, while I was really just in a place of rage and anger and pain, he came to me again and he spoke audibly to me. And he said, Nick, you have to forgive them. I'm no respecter of persons. Who do you think you are that you deserve my mercy more than they do? You don't know their hearts. And I was like, that's not the message I wanted to hear when I was going through heck, right? But it's exactly the message I needed to hear. And so it woke me up to a realization of a heart condition that I had. Um, he showed me, it's like in that conversation, he showed me a lot of the things that I had done while I was on drugs that could have ultimately led to similar situations. And in that knowing or that remembrance, it's like he provoked my compassion because I realized here I am, a wretched guy trying to get over all my own bullcrap. And who am I to judge somebody? Like just because I'm the one suffering a loss in this doesn't mean I'm the only one that's ever suffered a loss. And it didn't give and I felt that it didn't give me the right to be someone else's judge, especially when the Lord has been showing me, or up until that point had been showing me, his grace and his mercy. And so I went and I talked to my bishop, and I talked to him about everything that I had done. Like I told him everything, and he we had to have a court because there was a lot of things that I brought up. And as they deliberated, um, they gave me probation. They said, "Look, you've been sober now for more than 6 months. You haven't made any, you haven't made any of those same patterned choices after what you were making before. So we feel like that you're truly repentant." And so for me, that was awesome because I felt like, okay, someone sees my progress, and that really helped me. So they gave me wise counsel. My bishopric did. They said, "Nick, uh, we want you to journal." And here it is again, right? The journal. We want you to write down your experiences, and write them down as often as you can. Like make that a habit. And then they also encouraged me, even though I couldn't do certain things within the church at that time. They said, what you can do is bear your testimony. So bear your testimony as often as possible. And through sharing your testimony and your journey with others, you'll find that you will experience a mighty change of heart. And that's exactly what happened. So I found myself testifying of some crazy things. Like I'd get up fast in testimony meeting and be like, "Hey guys, I was hooked on heroin last year. I turned my back on my temple covenants. I lost an eternal marriage. But let me tell you what the Lord's doing for me now." The more I shared my experiences, the more I found the Lord's hand in my life. I feel like I developed so much gratitude. Um, there it is. I developed so much gratitude for the Lord because I came to know for myself that there's no such thing as too far gone. I came to know of the reality of the grace of Jesus Christ. And and it's not because I was taught by anybody anything in particular. It wasn't a certain doctrine that I learned in Sunday school. It was through my own experience. Like, and I watched as he took me. It's almost like I could step outside of myself from time to time. And it was as if he took me outside of myself to give me a view or a perspective of the growth I was experiencing. And he would speak to me often. I would journal often, I would feel the Spirit prompting me to write certain things. And the messages that were most frequent in the beginning were, "Fear not, I'm with you. Let go of the chains of guilt and shame and receive my love." Like he said those things over and over to me. And it took years of him saying that, me writing it, and then him saying it again and me writing it again. I go through my old journals and I'm like, man, it took a long time for me to realize what he was saying. And I'm still realizing what he was saying and what he continues to say. And that is that he's forgiven me. He loves me. He accepts me, and that he is interested in my faith, in my heart, in my trust, and all the other stuff, the mistakes I make. He gives me space for those things because he wants me to learn. He wants me to grow. He wants me to have these experiences, right? And so I I was doing all the things, going to church, serving in my callings, and I was on that path for about 7 years. 7 years. I remarried. I had kids, We went to the temple. I was a regular temple attendant because I felt like that's what I wanted to do. If that was righteous, that's how I wanted to walk. And I'm not saying that it's unrighteous. I'm just saying that that's where I was. And so I had an experience back in 2021, um, where the Lord came to me in a vision, and He had come to me in vision in different ways many times before. And so this time it wasn't, a new experience to behold Him in the Spirit. Um, but this time He gave me some peculiar directions. He He asked me if I would let go of everything that tied me to the celestial world, to include my membership in the church, and asked if I would be willing to trust Him and go into the wilderness and let Him do a mighty work in my life. And so I wrestled with this, obviously, because of everything that I came to understand, or at least I thought I understood at that time. Um, I asked him about my callings. I'm like, but what about, the kids? I was a primary teacher and I had a state calling. And I'm like, but what about this? And what about that? What about my covenants, Lord? And he was like, you know that what's coming next isn't the celestial kingdom. Because what's coming next is a millennium with me. You don't think I will make anything right that needs to be made right with you to make sure that you have what I've promised you? I'm not asking you to forsake me. I'm asking you to let go of what you think to learn from me. That was the hardest thing that I ever wrestled with. And so I went to my bishop and I sat down with him. And it's interesting because I had scheduled a temple recommend interview, and I called them up a few days before and I was like, we need to change the nature of my meeting with you. We need to talk about withdrawing my name from the records. And so we did. And my bishop, he was such a kind man, and I'm so grateful for his leadership. He wrestled with it. He told me I was deceived. He said that I was a fallen he would later write a letter to the communities and be a source of persecution for me. And I don't judge him for that because I understand how he could see things the way he sees them and how he was doing what he thought he should be doing. But I left I withdrew my membership from the church. And then the Lord told me, He said, now I want you to go and minister to everyone. I'm calling you to the ministry. And I'm going to show you that my power doesn't come through the church. My power comes from me and through your faith. And it's not just your faith, Nick. This power I will bestow upon any who will exercise their faith in me and turn their hearts to me and let go of Babylon. And so I began to experience a lot of crazy events in my life. At first, I was sending referrals to the missionaries because I would go out and I would testify, and I and then it's just the way that I thought I needed to operate. I would then call the missionaries. I'd be like, "Hey, I got some golden investigators for you guys. Um, please teach my friends, right?" But it's like they would never commit. These guys, like, it's like I would send them, and my friends would come back to me, and they're like, they're not teaching me anything. Like, you've already shared the plan of salvation with me. We get that, but where's the meat? And I was like, complaining to the Lord, like, Lord, what's going on here? Um, I thought I was doing the thing that you wanted me to do, and and ultimately I realized that I needed to let go of that paradigm. That wasn't my mission. My mission wasn't inside of the church, and my mission wasn't to increase membership in the church. My mission is to increase faith in Christ, whatever that looks like, and it's to direct people to turn their hearts to Him. And so I've in this journey, I've had the opportunity to see many healings, people's hearts being healed, people physically being healed. I've seen many people enter into the waters of baptism. This guy that I know, he was working with the missionaries and he couldn't get baptized because he wouldn't let go of chewing tobacco. The guy had been chewing for like 40 years. And I was so frustrated with him. I was like, dude, you can't let go of tobacco for the Lord. Like, what's going on? And then the Lord said, Nick, you should baptize him. Let me. So I was frustrated with him, and I was like, dude, you can't let go of this. And then the Lord, he was like, you need to baptize him. Go back to Mosiah 18 and consider the covenants that my people have made with me when they've entered into the waters of baptism. So I went back and I read, and it was like a light went off. I was like, wow, the Lord requires hearts. He wants us to be willing to take upon ourselves his name and to become one, to bear one another's burdens, to grieve with those that grieve and comfort those that need comfort, to stand as his witnesses at all times, no matter what. And I realized that that was something, his name is Roy, that was something that Roy was willing to do. And so I asked Roy, would you be willing to enter a covenant with the Lord and allow me to baptize you? And he said, Nick, the Lord told me that this is what needed to happen 2 months ago, but that I needed to wait on you to figure it out. And so I go, isn't that crazy, right? So I tell my wife, I'm like, I told her, like, this is what the Lord's telling me. She's like, yeah, it's about time you realize that that's why you're on the path that you're on. Like, get out of your own way and go and do. And that was a wake up call too. Um, so I wound up baptizing Roy. Roy came out of the water and he said that his addiction to tobacco just left him. And I thought, man, isn't that fascinating? He couldn't let go of it because it was a word of wisdom problem and it was like preventing him from baptism. But as soon as he entered the waters of baptism, that left him and still has. That was 2021, 3.5 years now. And he's still not had a dip of tobacco. And I'm so proud of the guy. And I don't say that because I did anything special. It is the Lord, and it is those who exercise faith in Him that experience those kind of things. And so I've, I guess, in my journey, I I'm learning to to honor the struggles because when we choose to get on the path uh, with the Lord, all hell breaks loose. I mean, you've experienced it, and I have too. I was wrongfully incarcerated the next month after that baptism. I spent some time in jail. I had to fight for my freedom. And even in that, I say I had to fight. The Lord fought my battles for me. I was vindicated. I didn't allow the situation to make me bitter or to speak ill of my neighbors. Instead, I've learned to stay in a place of charity and forgiveness and mercy. Oftentimes, when hard things happen to me, the Lord reminds me how hard it was for me to forgive those that murdered my brother. And he said, if you could let that go, what are you holding on to this? And so it's like a check, right? Um, but the struggle is real.
That's a little ironic with you just saying that. It's funny.
Right. The struggle is real. Um, but it's good. And I'll tell you, so from 2021 to now, I feel like, man, those things were a lifetime ago. I still love um, the members of the church. In fact, now that I'm in Missouri, I love all of these different restoration branches. I love all of my brothers and sisters in Christ because it's like we're all laboring in the vineyard and we all have different parts, different roles, different places, but we're all part of the household of faith. My interest is the kingdom of God, right? And the kingdom of God consists of so many people. Um, and so I feel privileged to have the opportunity to be freed. I remember hearing you on one of your podcasts that someone asked you to label yourself. You labeled yourself as a free Mormon, and I love that. In fact, when I went to talk to my bishop, I told him, I said, it's probably easier for me to tell you what this is not rather than what it is, because this is not me losing faith in the prophetic mantle of Joseph Smith. This is not me losing faith in the scriptures. This is not me running from sin. This is not me trying to start my own church. And no judgment to anybody who is, but it's just not what I was doing. But what this was me, and what this is me being obedient to the voice of the Lord in my life. And so I know that I'm a little long-winded, but that's who I am. That's a little bit about my journey. Um, and I guess that's what brought us together here today.
So much of your story resonated with my own, and it was beautiful to see how God has walked this same path with so many. You're not the only person I've talked to that has a very similar story. And I have found that that's so true. As people come into Christ, he asks them to give things up, to give up the arm of flesh, to give up this telestial world, and to leave Babylon. When you said that, I thought, wow, there's so many things that you've said that are things that he said to me on this path over the course of years, where he was teaching me how to leave Babylon. And with so much love, there's so much love in the way he teaches us, and he walks us through this understanding to help us to let go of this world and really see things more through his eyes. And those eyes are so full of love and acceptance, and seeing the beauty of not only our own path but the path of those around us, and loving, being excited for that, being happy for them on their walk with the Lord. And anyway, so thank you. I really appreciate that. It wasn't, I mean, I kind of forgot you were still introducing yourself. I was just listening to you testify of the Lord's walk with you, and what a beautiful testimony that is of faith, truly of faith, because I have walked my own version of that road, and I know the tremendous difficulty of having him walk you on this path. And for so long you think it's the end goal is being part of an organization, an earthly organization, and you kind of put all your eggs in that basket. And then he's like, well, actually, I need you to let go of this world, and that includes that. And it can be a very difficult, heart-wrenching thing. And I love that you said it may be easier to tell you what it is not, because that's how I know that I know that my journey with the Lord has been one full of so much love. It is not a journey of anger or of hate or of malice or any of that, or a loss of faith. I feel like sometimes I spent my life being, which sister Mary and Martha is the one that's like walking, cleaning the house and prepping for all the guests. I feel like I spent my life constantly doing, trying to be enough to be taught by Christ, trying to be enough when I just needed to sit at his feet. And then he taught me how to do that. He taught me how to come and just be, and how to love, and to not be so busy doing, and more, and spending more time with him and learning from him. And that's, sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, that's just such a gift.
It really is. And I feel like, I've spent most of my life preparing for the millennium, preparing for Christ to come. I mean, really, I've thought about that most of my life. And so even when thinking about what I could do for the Lord, like what will I pursue when I go to college that will not only benefit my family, but will benefit the Lord and his kingdom. And when I thought about interests that I have, I took up gardening because yes, it would bless my family, but because it would bless my neighbors, sorry, but because it could bless other people, because it could help us in the millennium. Like I had a list of reasons why gardening was just such a beautiful thing to choose to do. But in the end, I kind of look back and I think, wow, I was so focused on the physicality of what I thought I could create to help build Zion. And that was a manual labor. When in the end, what it truly has turned out to be is all within our hearts, all
Right.
within our spirit, coming unto Christ truly.
Yeah. So I love that you said that. Just the other day, I was spending time in meditation and going before the Lord. I love to seek his face. I love to sit in the stillness and just wait. And I don't always see anything, but just the peace that comes to me when I do that is just remarkable. And so I'm doing that the other morning, and then I hear the Lord's voice very clearly. He said, "Cleanse your sanctuary, for you are a living and holy tabernacle of the Most High God." And that's the same for all of us. Like, he abides within us. And like, I guess he's been teaching me. There's a few things he's been teaching me recently that I feel like this is where I'm going to dive into for the next while, just learning. Um, I feel like he taught me through this last season that what he requires of me is my faith and my trust. The the choices I make, like he's let me know that like I'm good. It's not that I'm perfect. It's that the mistakes don't matter because my heart, it's his. And it, like, all I want, like you just said, like all I want to do is glorify him. All I want to do is give him my time. All I want to do is edify those children that he's placed in my sphere. And so I feel like the first season or this last season of my life has been about learning about faith. And now what I'm learning is about trust, and how trust leads to courage. How trust leads to courage and vulnerability. And how, when we come to a space where we truly trust in him, what happens is we develop the courage to stand with him and for him. And then we're so opened up that we don't run away from our weakness anymore. In fact, we wear our our weaknesses like badges, right? I had a mentor. I wrote this quote down from a book that one of my mentors wrote, and he said, "To lead a gorgeous life, wear your wounds with pride. Defend the scars that have deepened, developed, and refined you, and see the cuts that have hurt you as medals of valor awarded for your courage as you've pursued your deep goals and lofty ideals." And so my deep goal is to stand in the presence of God. That's my lofty ideal. And so I look at where at one time being addicted or being an addict or being poor, um, those things, they brought me shame. And now they bring me excitement because I can walk up to people without judging them and just be there for them. So with trust, uh, it's not just trust that everything's going to be all right. It's that it's like a trust that everything's not going to be all right, but that he's walking with me through the fires. And that no matter how hectic things go or get, he's got my back. He gave me a vision a couple years ago where I'm walking with him on this path and on earth, and everything catches on, like everything's on fire, right? And so it's like I call it the vision of the fiery wasteland. And so everything around me is on fire. I felt the heat, but he and I were walking on this path. We were barefoot. And I remember thinking, this is crazy. Like I looked at him, I was like, Lord, if I walk over there, like a little bit away from you, like, am I going to feel the heat? And he said, do you want to find out? I was like, no, no, I'm good. I was just being curious, but and so I walked through and so we just keep walking on the path. It's nothing other than us just walking together. And when I woke up, it was like I realized at least some of what he was teaching me. He was teaching me that the path ahead is going to be full of fires. And I just needed to know that I was equipped to handle it all as long as I stay with him.
I think that time it was just the mic drop. It's like boom, mic drop.
That's that is pretty dope.
How
That's
beautiful.
that's what it is, right? We go through our fires, and I mean, when we you said you've prepared, what in the world is going on? There it is. You said that you prepared your whole life for the millennium, right? Or that's been a focus that you've had. And
Mhm.
as we prepare for his coming, we realize the destruction that's coming as well. Um, and with that destruction is an opportunity to minister to humble and broken souls. Um, and so I feel like that's uh, that's where courage for me comes in. I trust that he'll walk with me through the fires, but but I also have the courage to endure whatever comes. Um, and that's, I mean, he warned us, right? He said that if we follow him, that the world's going to hate us because they hated him first. And they hated him because they didn't know Father who sent him. And at the same time, that's the same reason that the world will hate us. Because although they say they know him, they have a form of godliness, but they deny the power. Instead, they put all their eggs in the precepts of men and in the doctrines and traditions of men, which leads men into darkness and captivity. Um, I find it interesting that not just in the LDS church, but across different faiths, there are many leaders who lack vulnerability, right? The Lord gave us weaknesses so that we'd be humble. And instead, we're a part of a prideful generation. Go ahead.
I was just thinking that that's one thing. I grew up in Arizona, and there's lots of members of the LDS church there that I was, grew up in as well. And so everyone was perfect. Like I remember one time someone said something about their sins, that they'd overcome over on the pulpit, and my mom or someone leaned over and was like, I can't believe they just said that. Because that was very uncommon. And then I moved to California, and it was so beautiful because it was like every Sunday there's someone that's in there going, I wasn't active for 20 years. I wasn't active for 40 years, and they just own it, and it was so beautiful to hear those stories of faith. And it just gave so much depth that I hadn't previously experienced in my membership. And then, when we're walking our own struggles, it may help us know who we can turn to, who would understand, so we don't feel so alone. Because if we think everyone's perfect, it's like, oh no, no one's going to understand me, when that's far from the truth. And if we were more honest, then we could, we overcome things. One of the greatest gifts that God gave me through my divorce and everything I was dealing with, it was my birthday. And this was like a year ago, 2 years ago. And I was just heartbroken, at the time, so emotional, dealing with so much. And it was my birthday. And I remember thinking, man, I wonder what God will do for my birthday. And that's because, for one, he had taught me that he was there to bless me and to help me realize I had worth. And so he had kept blessing me with these things. But it was my birthday. And I was like, oh, I've been through so much. I wonder what's going to happen today and what he'll give me for my birthday. And it was kind of sounds silly, but I went to church that day, and there was a gentleman there who was visiting. He was a truck driver. He was just passing through. And I felt very clearly I needed to invite him over for dinner. And I'm like, okay, I don't know this guy, but sure. And I invited him over. And before he got there, I had someone else, show up and have a conversation. And then he shows up for dinner time, and we have this great conversation. And it's not that life was good. It was that life was really hard for him. He was just starting into a divorce, and he was really struggling with his own issues. And I just needed to testify. I just needed to be there for him and to testify of the things that God had taught me and to help him through. And it was such a beautiful gift. And I think if we, I find a lot of people share with me pretty vulnerable things, but I think part of that is because I'm willing to be vulnerable with them. I'm kind of like if you want to know, here it is. And life's real over here. And I'm going to tell you about it. And so there's so much beauty in that. And I think it's, for me at least, it's been one of the greatest gifts that my hardship has been for something, not just for myself, because really I'm grateful for that. And that's beautiful, but sometimes it's not enough. It's like, man, I hope this helps someone else too, because it was a lot to go through for just me, And I think it's a beautiful gift to be able to help someone in their struggle. And I think that's really what it means when the scriptures say being saviors on Mount Zion and joining with Christ in those things. Because if we can testify, if we can help give them that hope through the things we've learned through Christ, then we can help save them, with what Christ has taught us. And what a gift. So anyways, that, and not of a prideful way at all. It's all the Lord. But what a wonderful thing when we've gone through such struggle to testify of him and to share that light.
Right. And it allows us to minister authentically I mean, I don't know about you, but there were times where like I would do home teaching and I would go and I visit, and it was very just like it was my obligation, it was my duty. It's not that I didn't love everybody there, but it was very superficial. And so if we are to help people develop a relationship with Christ, it probably, behoove us to learn how to develop authentic relationships. I feel like, it's one thing to say, you know what, like even like in consecrating ourselves to others, it's like people are willing to consecrate their gains, but it's like everybody wants to hang on to their baggage and nobody wants to share that, right? Like, no, I'll give you all the best parts of me, but I'm going to keep this stuff to myself that I struggle with because that's mine to work out. And really, it's not. Because if we were to become one heart and one mind, to have an interconnected heart, we have to be able to bear those burdens with each other. But how could we bear a burden that we're not aware of, right?
Wow.
How could we like say, you know what? I'm going to go visit so and so because I know they struggle with addiction and I just happen to have a testimony that they could probably use, right? But if you don't know about their addiction, you may never be inspired to go visit them.
I have never thought of it that way, consecrating our baggage to the Lord. And as I was like clicking that into place, going, wow, that's really what it is. Like how beautiful. It's like that's exactly what he did for us, you know? That's exactly what he did for us. He went through
Yeah.
a
He said,
whole
give me
lot.
all your crap.
He said, give me it all. And he went through so much and he consecrated it. And that's what he's asking us to do.
Right.
Wow.
That's, let me
Beautiful.
tell you, like, I'm learning, like, I know, but I'll share it with the audience here. Like, I live here on a property in Missouri with five other adults, my wife and some other people. We have my kids up here, and we're learning consecration on our property. And one of the first things that we learned was that very thing that I shared. Like we were all ready to say, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll go to work and we'll throw everything in the pot and all this." But when it comes down to everything else, like I don't know about all that, right? Like I don't know if I want to stay. I owe $28,000 on my car, right? I'm a proud guy. I don't want anybody paying that for me. It took a lot of humility for me to say, and others, not just me, everybody had to say, these are my gains, but these are also my burdens. And at the same time, when we moved here, the Lord asked us to all stop working and to learn how to rely wholly upon Him. And so we went from having, a lot of income potential to sitting still, and then the burdens increase and they increase. And it's like what we're learning is the unity that comes through long suffering, but it's also the unity that comes through being vulnerable with one another. It's hard to hide from five people in your home, right? And so like if we're having a bad day, like it's hard for us to not address it. Someone's going to call you out on it, or at least say, "Hey, I see that you're struggling. What can I do to help?" And it almost forces us to deal with our shit, right? To like not ignore it, but to honor it and look at the opportunities. Like, what is the Lord trying to teach us right now? And so in this process, I find that those same principles of trust, courage, and vulnerability, they apply to to us individually as we seek to build Zion, to trust not so much that the other people have everything figured out, but that they're doing their best. And what a beautiful thing it is when we have courage to share our authentic selves with each other and to be vulnerable and minister to each other, starting in the home, as authentically as possible.
It was when I was living with a group of people for a short period of time as well that I realized that as adults, we expect the best out of everyone. We don't like to deal with the messy parts. We just want the best. We don't want to deal with that. And I was thinking about that with how, children, God kind of taught me in that situation that, if a child falls, there's usually an adult or two that goes and helps him up. Or are you okay? And yet when an adult falls, we're like, keep your problems to yourself, like deal with it. And we get annoyed with them for their, what we might coin as bad behavior. We don't like it. And instead, why aren't we running to them and going, how can I help? Like, I see that you're struggling and I love you enough to want to help lift that burden. Is there something I can do? And what a different world that would be. And I think, you know, in the scriptures where it says over and over and over again, because it's in a few different places in the Bible, it says that to help the fatherless and the widow. And God kept sending me to those. And I think it's because, in our society, our telestial, we'll want to call it, our worldly Babylon society, I guess, we just expect people to be this island and to figure it out all by themselves. And they have to be strong. I mean, think about it. One of the favorite things people tell you when you go through something hard is stay strong.
Hmm.
Really?
Right.
And it's interesting to me because it was like, well, I stayed strong through the years I stayed strong and silent through the years of abuse and manipulation and whatever else. And it's like, when it comes to the overwhelm where it's all just kind of breaking loose and things are falling apart, you know what one of the main messages from the Lord was to be pliable, to be bendable with the winds, to be able to move with what comes. And because if we're too strong, it actually makes us more brittle because then we break.
Right.
And the things that he's taught me now, now I see how it's possible that people could come together and really support each other in a Zion-like community. Because if we were loving each other like that, I see you're having a bad day. Can I help? How much more beautiful would it be? And that's including, I understand when he says consecration, I guess is what we call it. But I see how that's even possible. When they say love your neighbor like yourself, I don't think I really understood what that meant. And he's saying, because why, if we had this love and this desire to help lift, then the suffering wouldn't be there. Like how beautiful would that be? And anyway, and that's why it starts here, because we won't get there without the work that we do inside our own hearts and with the Lord. And there's so many things, like I've spent time trying to figure out myself, but I wouldn't have been able to figure out half of it if the Lord wasn't whispering in my ear going, hey, look behind that curtain you've put up back there. Oh, look at that wall you have, let's unpack it. Or right. I actually had a dream recently where he's like, Sarah, you dug yourself a hole. And he's like, you put yourself there because it's safer, right? Because then you don't get hurt. He's like, you dug yourself this little hole because now you have little barriers and you won't get hurt down there. He's like, but the problem is that I can't reach you. You can't feel the good either. You're afraid of that too. And it all passes you by. Like, yeah, you might not get as hurt, but you don't also get the joy. He's like, I need you. And he came down. I mean, obviously he can reach us there, but I'm just saying, like, so he walked down and was like, come with me, come with me out of the hole. And and then we got to the top and he handed me a shovel and he had one himself. And he's like, let's fill it in. And and to be like him is to not just leave each other, to do it ourselves. I I realized I grew up with this self-sufficient mentality. Be self-sufficient, be self-reliant, I guess is kind of the terminology that I had growing up. And it was through my divorce that I really realized the lie that was, how contradictory it was to the actual words of God and like the words of Christ in scripture. Because we're not meant to be an island. If we were, he would have created a world for each of us. Been like, okay, figure it out all by yourself on this beautiful world, to yourself. But he didn't.
I've never heard it
He
put
put us
that
all
way.
here
That's true.
and so we're meant to do it together. So.
That's that's beautiful. It's so scary though, right? Because we've it's like not just in the church, but just in the world in general, we've been conditioned to compare ourselves to other people, right? And comparison is the thief of joy. And joy is found in, the Lord and in our own divine nature and identity in Him. Um, I was having a conversation with the Lord this morning just about some things that I was trying to let go of. And he asked me, he said, Nick, what scares you the most? And so I thought about it and I was like, not being with you. And he said, now you know that's not going to happen. So can you let go of that? And so I let that go, but then it made me think like about all the people I love, like the people who are here in the home with me. It makes me want to find out what scares them the most and how can I help them? How can, not that I would be able to take away their fear, but what a gift it is to have support, especially when we all are going through heck, following the Lord, being judged by others, being shunned, cast out, called false teachers, told that we're deceived by Satan. And it's like, where's the charity in that? Like, where's the example of love that these shepherds are supposed to have? Instead, just like Isaiah said, they're like blind dogs. They're like dumb dogs that don't bark. Like they growl at us, but they don't bark to warn us. I have a Great Pyrenees that chases off the coyotes, and it kind of sucks because he's barking all night long. But at the same time, I'm grateful that he's barking all night long because he's keeping the danger away, right? He never comes to me though and growls. He never like comes to any of my kids, even though he's so much bigger. He never growls at us, right? But it's like these other leaders in different churches and even members of other churches, people who profess to be Christian or Christ-like, but they show their teeth at you, right? They hide their own humanity and then they growl at you for yours. And it's like that just doesn't sound celestial to me, right? Like you can say those catchphrases all day long. Think celestial, be celestial, be worthy, remember who you are. But until we are willing to own our stuff, like I think we have a long way to go. I mean, how many times did the prophet Joseph get chastised by the Lord? This dude saw God, right? How many times did Moses get chastised by the Lord, right? Peter, James, John, Paul, all these guys. It's like, come on, man. Like, let's be real with each other. Let's invite Christ. Let's invite others to come under Christ by truly being authentic in our walk with Christ.
Jesus in a word or a couple words, what would it be?
My God, He is faithful, and He is my best friend.
Well, thank you so much for being here again, and thank you so much for your courage and your willingness to be outside the box. Lord.
Thank you for being here, and don't forget to subscribe. God bless.